Before we get started, I have one quick note. Our country is in the midst of a revolution. Like it or not, it's here. I want to be clear that this isn't about politics. Experiencing horror and outrage at the spectacle of racially motivated violence and killing is a human reaction. And the need for safety and security is a human need. To the extent that you can help those targeted by racially motivated violence feel a little safer, please, we beg you, do so.
And I don't recommend this for everybody. It's just what worked for me.
Look, I don't do public shaming.
We were just this lovely, plump family.
You have to live life right now.
Hi, this is Living Large in America. I am your host, Lise Quintana. My guest today is Philip Barragan. He is the author of Fatizen, which is both a prose novel, except it's Fatizen. There's a number after it, and I can never remember the number.
24602.
Fatizen 24602, which, why does it sound to me like Beverly Hills 90210? And now Fatizen, the graphic novel. And so far, part one of Fatizen, the graphic novel, is out now, but apparently part two will be coming out this summer. Hopefully. I'm super excited. So welcome, Philip. How are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you having me on your show.
I am so excited. Like, ever since I read Fatizen, ever since I got it into my hands, this is just such a different story. And it is, let me say, I read pretty much strictly fantasy and dystopian fiction, etc. And this is the best kind of dystopian fiction because it takes things that we have in our lives now, and things that exist now that we're all familiar with, and just takes them all the way to their logical extreme. You have that surveillance state that we all just kind of like, okay, yes, we know that Facebook is taking every single bit of our personal lives and marketing it to every large corporation in the world, and it's okay because I can keep up with all my friends. And honestly, I know that most people know that and are aware of that, and like that's just a trade-off that we make to be a global village. But also, you really have touched on this growing disparity between the ideal of what people are supposed to look like and the reality of what actual people look like. That's a thing that we bemoan all the time, that, at this point, 70% of American adults are overweight. Almost half of American adults are obese. And yet, that still carries a huge stigma to it. So we're all supposed to hate ourselves all the time. That's ridiculous. And I really, really love that your lead character, Delilah, just fucking refuses. She is, fuck that. I'm not going to hate myself just because you don't like the way I look, or you think whatever about me. You're not going to make me hate myself. So where did Delilah come from?
She is an evolution. The character, it is really essentially how I feel about life. I won't say that she's me in drag. People have asked me that. But really the concept comes from a lifetime of enjoying who I was. From the time I was a child, I was a chubby little fat kid. And I, like all of us, received all those messages of how you're not worthy if you are fat in every way, from every angle of media prior to social media that we have now. And as a child, I have always been drawn to the obese, to the biggest people. And I never knew why. From, the fat kids in school to those people that we see and most people mock in the Guinness Book of World Records. For some reason, that segment of the population, it was important for me to look into, to understand, and to explore. When I was a teenager, I started dating fat guys, and I used the word fat as a descriptor and a sign of appreciation. I think for so long we have thought about the word fat as a pejorative, something meaning less than, or something that if you're called fat, you should be shameful and upset. But for me, it has always just been a description, but a description of beauty. And so whenever I use it as a sense of appreciation, adoration, and love. But I started dating these fat guys as a teenager, and I realized not only is it something I think aesthetically beautiful, but there's something so intrinsically warm and loving about a fat body. And so I never understood the shame that we're supposed to feel because I have never felt it, even though I allowed myself as a teenager, as we all do when we're in our teens, I allowed myself to think, okay, well, let me try and force myself thin. So I did that, diet pills and everything else, low carb diets, in the early 80s. And I got very thin. I got very skinny. And it was torture on my body. I don't know what kind of damage I may have done to my body trying to change my set point. And I was an athlete as well. And throughout my later childhood and teens, I was a swimmer. I'm a two-time junior Olympian in the butterfly. And my coach had plans to take me to the Olympics. And all I thought about, and I stopped swimming after the 9th grade, after I swam varsity in high school on the swim team and water polo. And I thought, okay, I had my enjoyment, and it is something that I enjoyed. But the emphasis to maintain that swimmer's physique, it was just too intense. 2 hours working out in the pool before school, 2 hours afterward, followed by an hour at the gym, and minimal carbs. It was just too hard. And I realized it just wasn't the body for me. And so I allowed myself as I got older to release on the dieting and just see where my body would go. And that's really when my continued evolution of looking at fat people as, okay, where's the place for fat people and myself wherever I was in that scale of thinner, appreciator, chub, wherever you're at, where is that? And I've been on quite the journey of learning what society thinks and where the role of the fat person is. I started in '96 a social club, one of the largest in the country at the time, with a friend of mine, Girth and Mirth, in Long Beach. And we created this monthly get-together of fat men, gay fat men specifically, to be able to learn how valued they are and how lovable they are. Those who found them attractive, whether they're big or small, it just created, goodness, until the early 2000s, very successfully creating a safe place for fat men and the men who really appreciated them.
And I think that allowing people to be what shape they are, allowing people to be what shape they're comfortable in, and realizing that when you feel comfortable in yourself, you're putting out a certain energy that is hugely attractive. That is what's going to make people attractive, not carving them down to some sort of impossible societal ideal, but building them up to a very possible psychological ideal. I think that that's great, and I love that you made a space for people to get to feel that about themselves. That is awesome.
I appreciate hearing that, and I had to really be careful as I was writing the story, because I wanted the character to be able to not only embrace herself, but to be cautious not to use that character as any kind of fat political mouthpiece of saying we should all be this way, because that is no better than the voice from the diet industry telling you you all need to look this way. So I really, really made an effort with that character in Delilah to vocalize, I'm fine the way I am, let me be. There's room for everyone in this world. And I really made an effort throughout the whole story to make that clear of there's room for everyone in our world, no matter what size you are, that you're lovable, that you're valued, and there's no shame in whatever you look like.
And you didn't fall into that sort of trap of Fat people are only ever going to be with other fat people, and fat people are only with fat people because they have both given up on themselves and therefore they have no standards. And in Fatizen, Delilah's husband is what, a more nominally sort of shaped person. He is on the thinner side. He is muscular. He's good looking. And yet she doesn't have to act like she's desperately grateful for this person's love. She takes, of course he loves me. I am an amazing person, as one should.
In some of the shows on television right now where they have shown couples where that is a reality for them in that relationship. And I wish that it wasn't either way, meaning for anyone who was fearful that being too large, they'd become unattractive. But the reality is, I think sometimes that can be, and I think that's really more of a result of the individuals and where they're at in their own evolution and what they understand love to be, or if they let other desires override that. But unfortunately, I've heard that.
I do think that there is a spectrum from I am attracted to this sort of person to I fetishize this sort of person. And I think that's where the difference is. Like, yes, my husband may have been attracted to me when I was larger, but certainly he was not fetishizing my weight or my size. And therefore, now that I'm losing weight, he still loves me because he never fetishized the weight itself. And there certainly are people out there who have an absolute fetish for a larger body, and that's fine. I don't think that those people are like incapable of finding love. But you are allowed to love whatever you love. But certainly when fat is more of a fetish than an attraction, it's going to be a little more difficult. That relationship, I think, is a little more fraught.
I definitely think that if an individual doesn't have a sense of who they are and their sense of value, that it can be more of a challenge to find that kind of balanced relationship. For those individuals who are into size fetish and who are strictly about that, I think it can be a lot more challenging to find someone else who is emotionally grounded and available to love outside of that. Again, the message in my book was there's room for everyone, and if you're into being fatter and someone wants you fatter, it's, I think, like anything, when you start to increase the number of variables that you have to meet for the relationship to work, it can be more challenging. And I think that it's possible, but it can be a little more difficult to find that match.
Sure. And have you ever seen the show My 600-Pound Life?
A few times.
Yeah, depressing as shit. Oh my God. On My 600-Pound Life, there's an episode where there is a woman who wants to get bariatric surgery because she's in a lot of pain. She's having a lot of health issues. And after she has the surgery, her husband is horrible to her. And, she says afterwards that he married, a happy fat girl. And when she stopped being a happy fat girl, he just turned on her. This is obviously a guy who is fetishizing a larger body and not valuing the person that he married, only valuing the body. Those are the people that I, think, okay, you've got some issues. You've got some issues that have nothing to do with sexuality or health or anything. You've got other issues that you need to work through before you can have a relationship with someone else, because that's just not nice.
I have seen those episodes, and I think I know the one in particular you're talking about. And my own thoughts on My 600-Pound Life can be a whole nother. What I have found with that, being familiar with some of the individuals that have gone on that show, not on a one-on-one level, but knowing from the fatosphere.
Right.
There have been some couples who have been in the fat fetish world, the world where people gain on purpose and people encourage that. And the story that TLC presents is a real forced narrative of, we want to tell this story. And the people that are on that show, either the truth has been edited out, or they're not admitting all of their history so that they can tell a particular story. And I think the one that we're both thinking about, she had been in this other world, and for whatever reason, and some of us can get to the point of, okay, I can't sustain the size anymore. I need to come down. Mm-hmm. And to force a particular story is not honest on the media side of, is her husband being honest to what they were previously, and his love isn't capable of going to an entirely different place than they agreed to at the beginning. We don't know that. All we know is what TLC has provided. And so I don't think, in some cases, and there's probably more, the odd story out, that we don't hear the real story, because there's another more recent episode that I've seen that fits that same story of, we're not seeing the truth of prior to TLC, something that I knew directly firsthand of, you are not being honest. What you're telling the world, or what TLC is showing the world, is a twisted version to fit the story they want to show. And we're not getting the truth. All we're getting is what they want to tell. And I think that's dishonest as writing a character and not allowing that character to be a natural character. You can cheaply develop a plot with a character that does exactly what you want outside of what an average person would normally do. You can see that in really bad writing or bad TV or movies where the rational person wouldn't do that. But when you force a character down a particular road because you want them, like some bad Italian film, you want them to do something so specifically where, okay, the average person wouldn't do that. It just feels forced, and it's obviously forced. And I think that's what we get from TLC sometimes is, okay, look at the pitiful fat person at the mercy of this evil feeder. Like, that's a story they love to show, and it's just not always true. There was a recent other TLC show of Hot and Heavy. They only had 3 episodes, where they showed some fat wives. They were all fat, and their appreciator husbands, some of whom seemed a lot more vicious and tyrannical in keeping their wife fat. And even that show, sensationalizing the whole experience, seemed really forced. And I thought, okay, I could just tell in some of the scenes that aired, they're forcing this conversation. This is obviously for TV. This is obviously for ratings. Yeah. And so I think sometimes we have to be a little cautious of, are we seeing what, again, TLC capturing this market of sensationalizing fat people who have grown so fat that they can't walk anymore, and weight loss is the only solution for them. And look at the ones that have failed so miserably because they couldn't stop eating, when we know obesity and super obesity, there are so many more layers of what takes a person there other than gluttonous, lazy habits. And that's one thing in Fatizen that I wanted to show of, fat people are not all lazy. I don't want to say all lazy. Fat people are just fat people. They have full, rich lives. They're capable of doing anything they want in their life. And that's what the next 2 issues of Fatizen, the graphic novel, will continue showing, the story of the evolution of, as you mentioned, taking an idea and it all the way to its end, no matter how absurd that is. And in the story that I've written, it's about the diet industry and the power that we give the diet industry. And what happens if, as in Fatizen, turn that on its head and make the diet industry a branch of the federal government, becoming one of the most powerful, because let's admit it, they are, and what could happen to society as a result. When you mandate everyone be thin, when you mandate there is no choice, and if you're fat, you lose your rights as a citizen. My goal was to show, okay, let's just go with that. Let's just show what would happen to our society if we gave in and we made that the mandate, we made that the decree. And in this world, and coming up in part 2, we start to see what happens when you push fat underground, literally, and you say you can't be fat. As in anything, when you deny a person or a society a particular thing, it can become really twisted and resurface in a totally unexpected way, and that's where the story goes.
That's true. And I feel like the only good thing that I have to say about the current political administration is that under the current political administration, fat will never be outlawed. To go back to My 600-Pound Life, you're right, that narrative is so weirdly artificial, and the narrative was always exactly the same. There was always the, I need to lose weight right now or I'm going to die. There was the admission of trauma. Everyone had to have some sort of horrible trauma in their past that led to their gaining weight, because we are only allowed to be fat if we have suffered. And even then, you have to suffer more to get thin. And then there is the threat that if you don't lose 50 pounds by yourself, you're not going to be able to get this surgery that will save you. And then there is the trauma right after surgery of getting up and getting moving, etc. And all of this is like, to the very dramatic music. And those things are the same every single time. Any nuance is flattened out of that narrative. And now, having been through that surgery myself, they're not having a hard time walking because they're 600 pounds. They're having a hard time walking because they just had abdominal surgery. They have to cut open the middle of your body. When you stand up, the lower half of your body is trying to rip those stitches out. It fucking hurts. Of course it's hard to walk around. This is not a weight thing. If I had any kind of similar surgery today, I'd be doing the same thing. To make it look like these people are suffering because they're so grossly fat that, everything is horrible, it just does everybody such a disservice. And it makes people who are thinner feel unnecessarily virtuous. That is just not a thing. And it also really, I think, minimalizes the triumph of these people after surgery, because surgery is just a tool. You still have to eat less, and you still have to, exercise and all of that. And so I feel like kind of handing the credit for their weight loss to the doctor and not to themselves, it just does them such a horrible disservice.
I agree. And I think the motivation for many, if not all, is to get the surgery. And I think there's a certain compensation, if not 100% compensation from TLC to pay for the surgery. And so there's a real motivation for the individual to say whatever they need to say to be able to get that end result, even if it means agreeing to that forced narrative. And one episode, and not to beleaguer the whole topic of TLC, and I think it was this season, there was an individual, his name was JT. And he was extremely large, 900 pounds. And in his opening dialogue where, they allow the individual to talk and record how they feel about themselves, I felt that was one of the few really most honest narratives, his own speech about his experience. And I found it intriguing that as much as the show tried to show how horrible it was in his situation, he lived very, very humbly. He talked about how much he enjoyed his food, and it made everything okay. And he admitted to the difficulties, and it was obvious what difficulties he had, but he didn't describe his situation as, I have a horrible life. He had a girlfriend that helped take care of him. And if we look at his life from the average perspective of what's expected of us as citizens. It seems, yes, it seemed pretty horrible, pretty tragic, but the way he approached it was, well, I'm just concerned because, going to the bathroom was getting harder, and yes, of course, that is something that should be addressed, but he wasn't crying of, my life is absolutely horrible and I hate myself. There was no self-hatred in what he was saying and how he talked about himself. And I appreciated that he was allowed at least to state, this is what I like about what I'm doing. This is what I think needs to change. But he didn't go into it hating himself or saying, I'm a horrible person, or, this is unacceptable. He just said, well, I think I need to get some kind of change in my life. And I really loved that we heard, okay, here's one of the few times that an individual is allowed to say, I really like eating. It makes me happy. I'm at a point now where it's getting hard to function or even fit in the bathroom. But it wasn't from a point of hating himself. And for me, that was real important to hear that, okay, at least we can hear someone talk about, I don't think I'm a horrible person. Some change needs to happen, but I really like this aspect or that aspect. And it was a point of me of realizing, okay, so at least there are glimpses of honesty that particular show, which it really is just pure sensationalism. Sometimes little glimpses of the truth can come out at times.
So this is really interesting. This is bringing up a real epiphany for me, because I know that at my heaviest, I never, just on a day-to-day basis, I never walked around wrapped in a cloud of shame. I always dressed well. I always carried myself with confidence because I always sort of knew my value in the world. I'm fine. If you don't think I'm fine, that's not my problem. And I think that part of the problem is that my shame was not about, oh, my body is unattractive, or, I have these habits that gross other people out, I feel shame. It was more like, I actually like myself, but I understand that other people think that I shouldn't, and so I feel this sort of meta shame because I don't think I feel the way I'm supposed to feel about myself. So my shame is not about my actual body. My shame is about my feelings about my body, and that they are positive instead of negative. And I wonder how many people, A, are feeling that same thing, this meta shame, because they don't hate themselves the way they think they should, and whether they even realize that it's that meta instead of, actual, I hate myself, which is even sadder.
I think there's a lot of that goes on. The messages that we get, of course, we carry them. I mean, I carry those as well. And I consider myself, first and foremost, on the front lines of fat activism. And I forget sometimes how fat I am until I see a picture of myself in a situation with a group of people and I realize, oh yeah, I am that fat. Because I don't always consciously realize how large I have become, and by my own choice and choosing, I am not a victim of uncontrollable appetite. And that's what some people, I think, don't always realize just for a moment of, I am the way I am, I look the way I am because I choose this. I choose this body, I choose this size for a variety of reasons. It's not just sexual, it is who I feel comfortable being. It's where my body, my set point is at. And when I look in the mirror, I love every angle, every bump, every fold, every pound. This is who I am, and I don't regret. I am not ashamed, and I'm proud to look the way I am and everything that comes from that. But there are times when I'm in a work situation, and that's when I realize I don't fit here. And sometimes it's literal. when we're in these conference rooms in the office, and I work in a county facility, the tables and the chairs and the walls around, there's no room to pull the chair out to get into the conference table elegantly. In my mind, I don't want to be the last person to the meeting and have to have people stand and move to be able to get to the open seat on the other end of the table and navigate around where there's not enough room. Maybe it's enough room for someone who weighs 160 pounds, but not for a 400 plus pound fat boy. I'm making an effort to get to the meeting 20 minutes early, and I have to consciously think about this. Or if I have to get to another facility and it requires walking, and for me lately that's a little more of an issue, I need the extra time to get to the bathroom, stop sweating, pat myself down, readjust myself so I look fresh and ready for the meeting. That could be an extra 30 or 40 minutes above what someone who is not fat has to put into getting to that meeting, so that I look as presentable as I can, because I know people look at the fat person as, look at, he's out of breath. He is sweating. He knows that he should not be this fat. And I want to present the most I can do everything that anyone else can do. And for me, that is trying to adjust to that meta issue of, I don't want the message that I am fat to make it, I can't do what everyone else can do. So I'm trying to force myself into this role of, look at, everything is fine. Just because I'm fat, I don't need any more assistance, and that whole ableist philosophy is even hard for me to escape. We should all be at this level. We should all be able to walk there. I had to tell my last supervisor, when we had to walk to a meeting and then back to our car, she wanted to process the meeting right away. And all I can think about, and I'm just being honest, from where the meeting was held back to the parking lot is, can I sit down? If I stop, do I make my coworkers stop because I need to sit down? And I was able to make it. And she looked to me when I wasn't answering her, and I said, I cannot talk and walk at the same time. So why don't we continue this conversation when we get back to the office? Because I'm just trying to breathe. And I started laughing, and she said, okay, that's fine, because she knows where I'm coming from on a lot of this stuff. And again, in the back of my head right now, I'm thinking, what kind of message are you sending that you're so fat that you can't walk and talk at the same time?
No. Here's what I want you to do next time, okay? You're going to need a few props for this. First of all, you're going to need some sort of large flowing caftan with a lot of purple and gold. You're going to need some sort of crown, and you are going to need to arrive at least 10 minutes late, because you want the crowds to part before you. You are not the fat guy. You are fucking majestic. You are a majestic king coming in and making the crowd part before you so that you can sit in the place of honor. They need to get out of your way. You're not interrupting them. They need to get out of your way so that you may take your rightful place. And then they all have to sit there while you leave early, so that you can then, go on your way. And honestly, that is where my mind goes when you're like, yeah, I have to struggle into the seat. No, fucking make them wait for you. Make them know that you have power, you have substance in this situation, and that you are demanding the respect that your stature has earned. This used to be a thing in antiquity. Fat was equated with somebody who had resources in times of scarcity, and therefore that person commanded respect. So,
I love that. Thank you. I had dinner with a friend of mine who was large. This was years ago, before I wrote the novel. And I wrote a scene into the book in part 2, as you'll see, that happened to us. We went out to a restaurant, and the walk to the bathroom from our table was through this really narrow, inhumanly narrow path of tables and chairs and people. And I said, shit, I have to go to the bathroom, and it is just like an obstacle course. And he said, just push your way through. And he stood up and he pushed through, and it was like parting the sea, and he just unapologetically made his way through. So in the opening of the scene of part 2 of Fatizen, I put that scene in there after processing for a while, wrote it into the story of what one of the two brothers, Mark and Kevin at this point being the larger of the two, where he does that, he just uses his belly as this ice-breaking boat and just makes his way through a room. And then, of course, chaos ensues, but it really is what stuck with me of, you need to do that. And so, yes, I have thought about that. I have written it. I have replayed these scenes over and over in my head, because we shouldn't have to apologize for the space our body requires, which is the opening line of the book.
Right. And the worst thing that's going to happen if you walk into a room and you just breeze through it like you own the room, the worst thing that's going to happen is somebody is going to call you something that you've heard before. You've lived through that shit before. You know you have. And you lived through it. It's like, well, you know what? That is not my problem. If you have that opinion of me, that is fundamentally your problem. Very few people ever talk to me about my size, or as I started to lose weight, so many people said to me, I never thought of you as fat. And I'm like, wow, really? Did you not see me? There were many times when I would go into, some meeting or something, and I'm looking around going, yep, I'm the fattest person in the room. And that is a thing that you notice when you are a larger person. What you do with that feeling after you notice it is kind of up to you. I have one big question that has been sort of nagging at me ever since I've read Fatizen. So you obviously, wrote this out of your own experiences of being a larger person in American society. Why did you make your heroine a woman?
That's actually really good, and there's a simple answer, is that I didn't want this to be my story. I didn't want this to be, well, look at this fat Latino male character. It would be too close to me. And I didn't want people to look at the character and automatically think, well, this is just you in comic book format. Or actually, I wrote it as a prose story, so before even the graphic novel.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there for a second. You didn't want it to be Philip's mouthpiece. Why? Because that felt too personal to you? Because maybe you felt like people didn't want to hear your particular story? Because that right there, that is not the answer I was expecting. And it strikes me as an even more interesting thing. Like, why would I not want to know your story?
When I applied to grad school, Fatizen started out as a 25-page fan fiction of Judge Dredd comic book form. And there was a group in Judge Dredd called the League of Fatties. And they were these kamikaze fat people that did everything they could to get the food and eat and have food competitions. So I had written a 25-page story where we look into this world of fat competitions to absurd results. And there was a one character and her husband. They were one of the vignettes along with these, the League of Fatties. And my first mentor in grad school said to me, okay, of the 4 vignettes in your story, this one and this one are completely uninteresting. The only one interesting story is this Delilah character, write about her perspective. And it was within this world of this League of Fatties fan fiction. And so that is where the entree into this world became, Delilah's story and the League of Fatties fan fiction. And so that is where the genesis started. Had it been a nonfiction piece, I would have written my story because I had already started writing my own story. So Fatizen, the genesis started from that first semester in grad school. And that's where the evolution then became.
I ask these things because, I know that I have a real hard time with nonfiction. Like I blog all the time, but that is very different. That's writing about one single feeling that I'm having in one single moment. I would have a hard time writing about my whole life, mostly because I am sort of uninteresting and unexceptional, and therefore, like, I bore the whole off myself. Why do I think anyone else would want to hear about me? You know, and it is that deep conviction that I am not an interesting person that keeps me from wanting to push my story into anybody else's face. You know, I love Fatizen. I love the story. I sort of resent the fact that you put this out before you had the whole trilogy, because now I have to wait. And in this current age of binge watching everything, of binge consuming everything, damn it, I want the whole thing now.
I love it. Thank you.
It's interesting, you know, my first thing was, obviously, there is the story of Philip Barragan and, you know, where you are in your life and how you got there, etc. And then there is the story, this very fictional story, because this is dystopian fiction, of Delilah and her struggles. And of course, anyone who is now going to read Fatizen, and I hope it's all of you, because seriously, this is a really good story. Like, this is not thinly veiled, you know, your story, because this is a wholly fictional world and it's kind of crazy. But anyone who reads it is also going to see elements of every fat person's life. The stuff in here is absolutely real things that happen today to all fat people constantly. And it's what makes being fat in America just one goddamn indignity after another. So unfair, so unfair. So now that you're finishing up the second of the trilogy?
Yes, so the part 2 has already been illustrated by my husband, and our colorist is finishing up. We have about 8 pages left to color, and the colorist he takes his time in getting to the pages, which is fine because he does a very comprehensive job. But I am 35 pages in to the lettering the pages. And so we're looking at having part 2 done by midsummer at the latest. And part 3 is almost all illustrated. So that probably we're looking at release of next year for part 3. And of course,
I'm gonna have to wait.
the prose novel you can still find.
You can get now.
On Amazon. Copies of that are still out there, even though it's technically out of print. That, and of course, that is, as any prose novel is, much more filled with the detail because being a debut work, I think I kind of overwrote, but that's just part of what, you know, some of us can do when we're writing. And doing the graphic novel, as a writer, I have to say it's really helped me look at, okay, how can I use an economy of words to take this very long conversation down to 6-word balloons? And for any writer, it's, oh my God, you can't be, what do you mean I only have 6-word balloons to convey this beautiful conversation that I wrote over 5 pages? And I realized, obviously I can, and I have, and 5 pages may have been a little too much for this conversation that, you know, can be shortened down to 6-word balloons.
You know, I do think that is one of the things I love about graphic novels, is the way that the graphic novelist has to sort of refine and hone things into these very spare, minimalist spaces and get across some very powerful messages. And you guys did that so well. Now, you have mentioned your husband and your colorist twice now without actually giving them their names. Let's go ahead and credit these guys.
So my husband, Mason Arago, he is the illustrator and did all the artwork for the graphic novel. And Chris Link is our colorist. He's a graphic artist here in Los Angeles.
Awesome. And they did such a beautiful job. And, you know, really, this works so very well as a graphic novel. And I have whole shelves of nothing but graphic novels, because it is a genre to which I am sincerely devoted. Because it is just an entirely different form of artistry than writing a regular prose novel. This is a very different thing, and you guys carried it off so beautifully. Yeah, so we will have a link to purchase of Fatizen, both the prose novel and the graphic novels, in the show notes. And I would like to thank you again, Philip Barragan, for coming on here and talking about Fatizen and talking about your journey. And I appreciate this so much.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure, and I appreciate the time and hope you and everyone else enjoys part 2 of Fatizen the graphic novel.
And that's our show. I would like to thank my guest, Philip Barragan, and thank you, my dear, dear listeners. Living Large in America is written and produced by Lise Quintana. Our music was composed by Cambo Smith. If you have a story about weight, body image, size discrimination, or fat phobia you'd like to tell, drop us a line, info@livinglargeinamerica.com. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and most other podcast apps. If you like the show, could you please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts? It really helps. And if you don't like the show, could you lie and say that you did? Because I'd do it for you. You know that I would. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again in 2 short weeks. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other.